Thank you for attending today and submitting your questions to us. We've already received hundreds of questions, so we'll try to answer most of those during the webinar. But as those of you who have attended any of our CBD webinars in the past know, we want to make this as interactive as possible. So we invite you to ask questions via your chat feature, which should be on the right-hand side of your screen towards the top during the webinar, and we'll answer those questions as well at the end. So we have two experts in the CBD space with us today that'll be joining us. But before I introduce them, I first want to go over briefly the topics that we're going to cover today. So as you can see on your screen, we're going to cover the endocannabinoid system. We're going to talk about dosing, do's and don'ts. We're going to talk about drug interactions, legal issues, state boards, FDA, DEA. We're going to talk about some new technology, nano and liposomal, and then we're going to discuss marketing CBD and how to talk to your local doctors and customers about CBD. Then we're going to get to questions. So here today to help you understand these topics is Tim and Evan Gregorius. Evan is our marketing assistant and CBD advisor here at PRS. He has extensive experience working in the CBD space. Most notably, he has assisted with the formulation of several commercially successful CBD products. He has presented at numerous conferences and trade shows, including the 2019 NCPA annual convention. He is one of the lead content creators and contributors of ncpacbdsource.com, and he's worked with numerous CBD companies on their digital marketing efforts and content, and we are happy to have his expertise here today. Our other speaker, our in-house CBD for pharmacy guru, as we like to call him, is Tim Gregorius. Tim is a registered pharmacist who is our current VP of operations here at PRS, and also NCPA CBD Source powered by PRS, which is a major national project launched by NCPA to help independent pharmacies with CBD education, products, and marketing. Tim is an expert on the subject of CBD for pharmacy, and his efforts and research are changing the way pharmacy owners approach CBD. So without further delay, I'm going to turn things over to Tim.
Thank you, Linda. Good morning, everyone. I actually want to thank you for being here and congratulate you for being here today. Apparently, all of us are thought leaders as social distancing to be the only way to avoid the coronavirus progression. Everybody wants to be going to electronic communication, and here we are. We had this planned weeks ahead of time, so we're ahead of the curve. So anyhow, over the next hour, we're going to update you on what we know today in March of 2020. We've been putting presentations together for over a year now on CBD, and we constantly struggle with whether we present only new content or whether we rehash previously covered topics. And I've spoken with hundreds of pharmacists at shows and conferences over the past couple of months, which helped me realize that we have to offer a blend of old and new, because basically pharmacists' understanding of CBD is all over the board. If you laid it out on a spectrum, we've got folks in kindergarten and folks in graduate school. We're making an assumption that at least some of you are beginners who would be lost if we jumped into massive detail and got very technical, talking about nanotechnology or drug interactions only. So therefore, we're going to cover 6 major headings in this webinar, starting with a very brief discussion of the endocannabinoid system. We really didn't want to start with the now worn out, what is CBD? And we've actually done that a few times. And I'm hoping now that everyone is progressing along this educational process here, and we need a little more in-depth information. So before we talk about the endocannabinoid system, though, let me preface this by guaranteeing that you're going to hear a few things today that you have never heard before, whether they're going to be something that you'll think about in 6 months and say, wow, they were on it, or man, that Tim guy was an idiot. I can't believe what he said back in March of 2020. So we'll let that to be decided. All right, let's get started with the endocannabinoid system review. In the conversations that I had mentioned that I have every day with pharmacists, I can confidently say that most pharmacists do not have a strong understanding of how CBD can have an impact on such a diverse array of conditions affecting several different organ systems. However, as I've said in previous webinars, once you grasp the role that the endocannabinoid system plays in the human body, that mystery vaporizes of how CBD can impact so many different conditions. We went into detail in a previous webinar about the ECS, and I suggest you check that out if you want some backward, looking back, if you want some information. You can listen to that at 2 times speed. I believe much less aggravating to listen to for a half hour than an hour.
And not to interrupt, but we actually have those videos to the past webinars that we've conducted on ncpacbdsource.com. All you have to do is register to become a member there if you have not done so already, and you have access to all of those past webinars that we've done, so you can listen to Tim talk for a half hour.
All right, so I'm going to fly through just a couple of the important concepts in a quick review, again, because of the diversity of this audience. So the endocannabinoid system is responsible for homeostasis. It literally is the mechanism that allows the processes of homeostasis to exist. There are 2 cannabinoid receptors, CB1 and CB2, that exist in nearly every organ system in the body, and those are acted upon by 2 primary endocannabinoids, anandamide and 2-AG. I'm going to let Evan dive a little bit deeper here to give you a little bit of an understanding of how these receptors interact with these endocannabinoids and what the resultant actions are.
Sure, thank you. So the endocannabinoid system is a system of receptors, enzymes, and signaling molecules, just like dopamine or serotonin. It consists of CB1 receptors in the brain and the central nervous system primarily, and CB2 receptors in the body and the immune system and the peripheral nervous system primarily. There are also gene transcription factors like PPAR that modulate genes in the immune system, and there are TRPV receptors that register pain in the peripheral nervous system and mood in the brain. These receptors have endocannabinoid molecules as their primary endogenous ligands, and as time goes on, they'll probably become considered part of the endocannabinoid system because we've known about them for a while. We didn't necessarily know their role, and now we've discovered that they're, like I said, the primary ligands are endocannabinoid molecules. The most well-known molecules, as Tim said, are anandamide and 2-AG. So what does a healthy functioning endocannabinoid system look like? Well, a doctoral course or program could be taught on this subject, but to keep it short and sweet, anandamide is released tonically or constantly to create a baseline activity level, which can be increased or decreased based on injury or disease or any other, or an array of other scenarios based on which organ system this is occurring in. 2-AG is released like a traditional neurotransmitter with transient spikes rather than constant tonic release, which both of these together enable the endocannabinoid system to have such a dynamic pattern of activity. In addition, there are about 10 other signaling molecules and almost 20 other receptors that we've known about for a while now, but we didn't understand their function until recently, and they fit under the umbrella of the endocannabinoid system. So this complex system exists at its core to regulate regulation, as Ethan Russo says, providing a framework for most of the other body systems to maintain homeostasis within themselves. So this is a system that we've known about for a while, and just to give you a brief example of its pervasiveness, 58% of all of the receptors in the human body are CB1 receptors. There are more CB1 receptors than all other receptor types combined.
And that fact alone, folks, leads me into the next thing I want to say here. When we're talking about CBD and people are still asking, is this a fad that's going to fade away? No, CBD works on the endocannabinoid system, and the endocannabinoid system, as Evan just displayed, is, this has been scientifically and academically studied. It's for real. And we also need to understand that the endocannabinoid system is every bit as important as the other systems in the body, the immune system, cardiovascular system, endocrine system, et cetera. And I know I still hear this daily. Well, people are saying, well, how do I not know about this? How did we not know about this? I don't want you to feel bad for not knowing about this. It wasn't even discovered until the mid 1990s. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. But I was at an NCPA conference a couple of weeks ago, and I met Kelsey Schwander, a clinical pharmacist who is the founder of B Health Consulting. And Kelsey and I were talking about the endocannabinoid system and why we don't know about it. Kelsey said that at the University of Colorado in 2012, she had a cannabis course. I was surprised that 8 years ago, there were schools already that far ahead of the curve. But as of today, it still looks like about 10% of pharmacy schools and medical schools in the country are addressing the endocannabinoid system in its curriculum. So we've still got a way to go there. The point of that is I don't want you to feel sorry for yourself. We can't be feeling sorry for ourselves that we didn't learn about this. But we also have to understand that we can't fake our way through this and expect to be able to counsel our customers who don't understand why it works and what they need from us. If somebody comes in and asks us a question, we need to be in a position to have at least some base understanding of this. Let me give an example. If you dispense an amoxicillin prescription to a customer, we're certainly going to explain to them that they need to take the medication even if they start feeling better. They need to finish taking the medication. And so they might say, well, why? If I'm feeling better, why do I have to take it? Well, every single one of us deals with that on a regular basis, and we know why. But why do we know why? Because we understand minimum inhibitory concentrations. We understand how the immune system works and what the amoxicillin is doing to assist the immune system in clearing the infection. So we have to have this basic understanding of the immune system to be able to counsel the patients and to answer that question, right? We don't have to be the expert, just have a working understanding. Well, let's make that a direct analogy. We have to have a working understanding. We don't have to be an expert on the endocannabinoid system, but we need to be able to answer the customer when they ask, well, how does CBD work for my arthritis, but my friend takes it for anxiety, or a neighbor takes it for migraine or insomnia? Those are questions that are going to stump you if you don't have at least a working understanding of the endocannabinoid system. One of the sources that I have gone to repeatedly and make sure that people know this man exists, Dr. Ethan Russo. He is pretty much one of the global experts on the endocannabinoid system and all the research being done. He is a great teacher. He makes complex concepts simple. I recommend that you go toward Ethan Russo when you need to educate yourself on the endocannabinoid system. So we're going to have a brief couple-minute video here of Dr. Russo talking about the ECS.
Something I haven't mentioned is that in its own right, cannabidiol is an endocannabinoid modulator. In other words, when given chronically, it actually increases the gain of the system, which is at its core a homeostatic regulator. To explain that, homeostasis is a state of balance. Many diseases interfere with the balance in a given system, and if we can bring that balance back to where it should be, there'll be improvement in the overall condition. This is one reason that cannabidiol is such a versatile medicine, because so many disorders operate on that kind of level. So if there's too much activity in the system, homeostasis requires it to be brought back down. If there's too little, it's got to come up. And that's what cannabidiol can do as a promoter of endocannabinoid tone, we call it.
Well, usually when you think of a drug, it goes in one direction or the other, but you're suggesting that CBD really has a bidirectional effect. It can balance either excess or deficiency.
Right.
Can you explain how that works, or would require a kind of in-depth scientific exegesis?
It would, but looking at the endocannabinoid system, it is sort of a buffer. So CBD can be thought of as a buffer as well. A buffer is something that will work both ways as need be. For example, in the endocannabinoid system, one of its main roles in the brain is to regulate neurotransmitter function. And again, if there's too much of one kind of neurotransmitter, it'll bring it down. If there's too little, it'll bring it up. Without diagrams, that's probably as well as we're going to do this evening.
Sorry for the slight delay there in shutting the video down. Well, I'm not going to have diagrams either if Dr. Russo didn't have them. I'm not. Again, you know, he is the source to go to for that information. So we're going to switch here to the next major topic that we're talking about, and that would be CBD dosing. Today, I will not give you dosing guidelines because there are no guidelines. The FDA has made some very clear statements about not making therapeutic claims either on labeling or on websites. So we surely better not be making distinct dosing recommendations to address specific patient conditions. Well, that leads us to the obvious question that we hear every day, that I hear every day at least. Well, Tim, how am I supposed to counsel a patient that asks how they're supposed to take CBD? My best response is to talk to the patient. Ask the patient what they know about CBD and what their ailment is. This inevitably leads to the question, well, how much should I take? Those questions are something you have to get comfortable with because that question of how much should I take, you need to be prepared to answer that. And recall, I said to you earlier, you're going to hear some things that you've not heard before. Well, here's the first of those. Conventional wisdom, everywhere you look, says, well, here's how you counsel the patient on starting a CBD regimen, and that is start low and go slow. I'm here to say, I believe that's a mistake. And here's why. If we start low and titrate up slowly, we run the risk of losing the patient. The patient's going to say after 3 days or 5 days or 8 days, well, this stuff doesn't work. It's not working for me. And during that up titration time, we're wasting their money and we're wasting time. Let me give you an anecdotal example and a real life example of how we dosed my wife. And this is going on 3 years ago now. My wife suffers from arthritis, most notably in her knees, but she was having arthritis problems and pain and swelling in her hands, and she has a pinched nerve in her upper back, lower neck, in her neck. So we said, well, let's try this. At Evan's suggestion, we said, let's get her started at about 25 milligrams of sublingual oil. A couple of days went by and she really didn't have much of a response. So instead of going up to 30 milligrams or 35, I jumped it up to 60. And lo and behold, within a couple of days, Lisa was reporting major relief. Interestingly, not in her knees right away, but the pain and swelling in her hands went away. And the issue with the pinched nerve went away. So then what we did is we backed it down, and we found then that about 45 to 50 milligrams a day sublingually works for Lisa. And here we are almost 3 years later, and that's still what she's doing, and it has changed our lives. I haven't had to open a pickle or a mayonnaise jar in the house now for almost 3 years. It has that ability to change lives. And had we done the low and slow, it might have been a couple of weeks and should have said, oh, this is stupid. It's just not going to work for me. So again, a real life example of why I think low and slow isn't the right way to go. The other question that pops up is which dosage form should I use? Well, that depends on what the complaint is. For pain and inflammation, let's start the patient on topicals. That seems to be the way to get the quickest relief. That can be relief in minutes. I fell pretty hard last night. I was swollen and black and blue by the time I was going to bed. I was curling. I didn't just trip over the dog or anything. Put some CBD on my arm. My wife asked me 10 minutes later how my arm feels, and literally I had forgotten about the pain. So I think that's a place to start with most people. Depending on the tissue damage, it may not work to really give them total relief. But let's think about that. If the topical works, then that's the right time to add a sublingual oil to them using the topical. And if that works, what is beginning to happen there is you're gaining confidence in the recommendations of how to handle the patient. You're getting some wins. Clearly, your patient is benefiting, but you're seeing what works and what doesn't work. This dosage form change is something we're going to discuss a little bit later at the end here, and I will come back to that, I promise. Let's talk about drug interactions, because this subject often serves to sober up a conversation pretty quickly. It gets very real when we think of CBD in terms of a drug-drug interaction. If we're talking about CBD with warfarin, valproic acid, clobazam, I can promise you that the convenience store clerk is not prepared to counsel a patient who is purchasing CBD from them and is also on warfarin, say. And that is a problem that it's one that we need to be most aware of, folks. This is definitely the issue with why we believe CBD belongs in a pharmacy. Drug-drug interactions, nothing could be more important to get it out of the convenience store and into a pharmacy. And this is the things we need to know. Again, let me give you another side story about Kelsey from B Health Consulting. Her and I were talking a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about the warfarin issue. And she said that in Colorado, where she practices, marijuana use is legal. They have gotten around the concern of this narrow therapeutic window for warfarin by telling people, if you're smoking marijuana, smoke it regularly. You can't just smoke it if you're on warfarin. You can't just smoke it on the weekends, because you're really going to mess up your INRs. So, again, we need to be thinking about CBD in these types of terms. Look, you wouldn't think about dispensing erythromycin, tetracycline, or theophylline without the knowledge that you have of what that patient is taking besides whatever new drug you're starting them on, right? We need to have that same sense about CBD when the patients are looking to do that. So what I want to do is let Evan tell us here again a little bit about why these drug interactions happen and what the mechanisms are.
Sure. So CBD can affect the cytochrome P450 enzyme system's ability to metabolize certain drugs, which leads to changes in processing times and therefore drug levels. The cytochrome P450 system being the liver enzymes, essentially. Primarily, CBD affects CYP2C9, CYP2C19, and CYP3A4 in that order. An example of an interaction is with warfarin, which is metabolized by CYP2C9. CBD inhibits CYP2C9, which leads to up to 30% increases in the blood levels of warfarin, which has obvious ramifications given the narrow therapeutic window of warfarin. And now this is somewhat complicated. Just because a drug can induce or inhibit a CYP enzyme doesn't mean that drug is metabolized by that enzyme. And similarly, just because an enzyme has an affinity for a drug doesn't mean that that drug has an affinity for the enzyme, which is why there can be many more complex interactions than just looking at, which metabolites there are and establishing which enzyme a drug is metabolized by. I mean, this is still an evolving science, but all you really need to know is
if a patient's taking CBD, we need to also be thinking about what prescription that CBD might be interacting with that patient is taking. Again, we wouldn't think of a patient starting on a new drug without looking at what they're already taking. And if a customer starts taking a new drug, we're looking at what's the therapeutic class that it's in, what's its mode of action, where does it act in the body, and we have to think about CBD in those same terms. And typically, the FDA is our usual guide for this. We're going to refer to the PPI or exactly how we think about that drug in terms of its actions in the body. Well, here's point number 2 that you're maybe not going to hear anywhere else, because we hear it's safe, CBD is safe, nobody's died from CBD. There doesn't seem to be any long-term problems with CBD. Well, the FDA is not so sure about that, and we just don't know. There have been no long-term longitudinal double-blind placebo studies. There are some going on now that I'm going to talk about briefly in a moment, but I'm here to say that I hope it never happens, but the first person to die from a drug interaction, everything is going to change. And, they're finding that CBD interacts with drugs. I mean, as Evan just evidenced, because of the CYP 450 system, something that needs to be on our minds. Hasn't happened yet. I just don't want us to get blindsided by that. I had the great fortune in October of having a couple of moments discussion with former FDA Commissioner Dr. Gottlieb. And I just point blank asked him, what should pharmacy be concerned about with CBD? If I'm going to be talking to pharmacists every day, what do we need to be aware of? And without blinking, he said, there are no long-term studies on safety, let alone efficacy. That needs to happen. So that was a pretty clear statement for me to hear. Let's move on to the legality of CBD. Evan here is fond of saying that everywhere we look, and whether that's any source or at a state board or manufacturers, the FDA, and even our website, everything that we talk about the legality looks like a glorified disclaimer. Well, it kind of is, because of this very unique circumstance where everyone is using it, but it's not approved yet. So everyone is in a CYA mode. Also note that there are clinical trials currently being conducted. I'm not going to go into the specifics because I really don't want to be talking about the specifics of which companies are doing them, but there are FDA approved and refereed clinical studies going on. Apparently they just finished the phase 2 clinical human study. So we're looking to see how that, whether we're going to get some results from that in days, weeks, or months. Not really sure how that's going to go. But sticking with this notion of legality and the FDA, in President Trump's 2021 budget, there was a late $5 million appropriation to increase the regulatory and enforcement activities of the FDA, specifically regarding CBD. That was huge. That was, for me, I looked at that and thought, wow, that's great. So the FDA did insert themselves, because they were looking for the FDA to make a statement on its enforcement discretion. Congress has specifically asked the FDA to do that. The FDA last May 31st held an open hearing. By July 2nd, when the public comments time was finished, they were hoping to be able to put out a statement by the end of summer. Well, here we are the next spring, and that hasn't happened. And I certainly understand why the FDA is in the position they're in. There's just not the data. The clinical research isn't out there. So what does that mean for you? That means this is evolving on a daily basis. Every state and every state board of pharmacy has had to make an interpretation of these FDA rulings and what's happening in the market. So there's no hard and fast rules. People are reacting with interpretations. What you need to understand, folks, is this is a paradigm to be understood, not a single law to be learned and memorized and adhered to. You really need to understand where things are. About 40 states have allowed CBD, and allowed, it has to be in quotation marks. Maybe they've remained silent. Maybe they have specifically said, yes, CBD is okay in the pharmacy. There are about 10 with varying degrees of restrictions on that. But again, it's up to you. You need to understand what your state board of pharmacy is telling you to do. Point number 3 that I'm going to say out loud here that flies in the face of just about everyone I speak to on the phone, where most pharmacists are worried about the legality here because they're worried about the DEA taking their license. The DEA has nothing to do with CBD. In May of 2018, the DEA put out an internal directive that they cannot enforce the Controlled Substances Act with respect to products excluded from the definition of marijuana. Well, that's CBD. CBD is excluded from the definition of marijuana.
Which,
Yeah.
not to interrupt you, Tim,
Please.
but that's why it's extremely important that they know exactly what is in the bottle that they have on the shelves. right?
Exactly. So yeah, when a pharmacist is out, great point, Linda. When a pharmacist is asking that question and they're worried about the DEA license, as long as you're not selling something that is regarded as marijuana, something with greater than 0.3% THC, you're really in no danger there. And the DEA is not out driving around, coming into pharmacies and testing the CBD. That's just not what they're doing.
Okay.
So what's new? Well, what's new is nanotechnology and the developments around nanotechnology. I first have to start off by apologizing. Last summer, we were wrong. I flat out said that nanotechnology was not relevant to CBD in the foreseeable future. Well, by November, I looked pretty foolish. But
Never say never.
Well, and that's how fast things are moving.
that's right. This is evolving quickly. So let's, I'm going to have Evan kick off this discussion here about what's new with technology.
Sure. So nano CBD. That sounds like a marketing scam. Pure and simple. But nanotechnology and nanoparticle delivery of drugs is already established science, and there are more than 30 pharmaceutical drugs that are delivered this way, including antibiotics and chemotherapy drugs and everything in between. So administering CBD this way is no different than that. Nano CBD refers to several different kinds of phospholipid emulsification of the CBD molecule. CBD is hydrophobic, which means it has low oral bioavailability due to extensive first-pass metabolism by the CYP enzymes we were talking about earlier. And this is why sublingual products are so popular, because they're absorbed directly under the tongue into the bloodstream, bypassing the digestive tract. Nano CBD is another way to bypass the digestive tract while still providing CBD in a more familiar dosage form that's much easier for patient adherence than sublingual drops that are oils, and they're difficult to use, and they're gross, and they're sticky. It's just a lot of patients have problems with that. Nano delivery can mean either wrapping a drug in a liposome, which has both hydrophilic and hydrophobic domains, or emulsifying the drug in an amphiphilic medium that forms small bubbles called micelles around the hydrophobic substance, allowing it to pass through hydrophilic media like the digestive tract. Throwing it back to middle school biology, the phospholipid bilayer of a human cell, or any cell really, is almost identical to that of a liposome, and it creates a hydrophilic exterior surface and interior cavity, but a hydrophobic space within the two walls of the membrane itself. This allows a liposome to carry a hydrophobic substance like CBD through a hydrophilic environment like the digestive tract. Both of these methods have pros and cons, but both allow more CBD to enter the bloodstream when it's taken orally. In effect, they give CBD water-soluble characteristics, even though the CBD molecule itself is not water-soluble. One caveat is that both of these methods require the presence of a phospholipid like lecithin, and both are expensive and difficult to achieve. Many CBD manufacturers claiming to have nano or water-soluble CBD simply just have lecithin as an inactive ingredient in their products, and that's why this is a marketing scam in a lot of times, and it's something that is new, and only reputable manufacturers are able to effectively produce it through the use of sonication and other pharmaceutical grade practices.
So that's a lot of information for early on a Thursday. Look, what your takeaway needs to be on that, folks, is let's not be freaked out when we hear nano or liposomal delivery or water soluble, freaked out as I was last summer. It just means protecting and carrying the CBD molecule through the digestive tract and into the bloodstream where it can act on its targets throughout the body. It's just a way to get around first pass so that we've got a greater bioavailability. That leads to what will be my next statement that I'm guessing you probably won't hear anywhere else. And you may be hearing this in the future, but you might not have heard it thus far. Speaking to the smart people, I've been talking to manufacturers, some chemists, FDA people. I'm going to make a prediction here that CBD sublingual oil is soon going to be obsolete. Don't know whether that's 2 months, 6 months, 2 years, but this goes back to the dosing question that we had before. This is all going to change. And based on what Evan just showed us on the slide there and what we talked about, if sublingual oil gets us a bioavailability of somewhere between 40 and 50%, and that's kind of all over the board, depending on the oil medium. And it's looking like nanotechnology delivering CBD in using this technology and putting the CBD in a soft gel capsule is delivering 70, 80, 90% bioavailability. Well, it's easy to see that who's going to be using an oil, the tastes and everything else, and just the inconvenience of that versus popping a soft gel cap. The idea of the dosage form changing is almost a no-brainer in my mind, because what we were looking at was sublingual oil was always better than the edibles. And now the nanotechnology, which might be a soft gel, is going to be much higher bioavailability than the oil, which is going to be higher than the gummy bears, and this is important, a soft gel capsule that is not manufactured using liposomal technology. So that is one that we really need to be aware of, because if you're chomping on a gummy bear that says 10 milligrams of CBD, you might be getting a 0.5 milligram delivered in a bioavailable sense. So as these doses, again, just as we said, this is evolving quickly. This is one of those areas where we really need to be aware of what's going on there. So for the last major subsection of this webinar, we want to talk about marketing. That's a huge question on everybody's mind. How do I sell CBD in my pharmacy? Well, CBD is a completely new category, right? We're thinking about it differently, and we have to. It's a new niche in the market. It's not just a new fragrance of a soap, or you get a brand new shiny cooler up at the front of the store and you put Coke and Pepsi and they start selling. You have to think about marketing CBD differently than that. And Linda, our marketing director here, is going to talk about what we're doing to help you with the marketing of CBD.
Absolutely. So as Tim stated, this isn't like any other product you're selling. You have to think about this differently, and that means marketing it differently. Remember, you have to set yourself apart from the other places that are selling CBD, and we've all seen this. This is very familiar scene to us. We've seen, you drive down the street, you're seeing it everywhere. So you can't just put a sign out that says, we have CBD, right? We're selling CBD. Your approach has to start with education. Just like Tim had stated, you're going to educate yourself. That's the first thing. Your approach to marketing CBD really is going to be rooted in education. So otherwise, how are you going to differentiate yourself from the vape shop and the gas station and everyone else who's selling CBD? So once you've educated yourself, you're going to then start by educating your local physicians. Brand yourself as the community CBD expert. Share what you've learned about CBD and suggest that they recommend that their patients come to you for all things CBD.
Yeah, let me jump in here for a second, Linda. We are not suggesting that these are formal training sessions with the physicians. I don't want something here to be thought of as outside of your scope of practice. This is just, you have a relationship with your local physicians. You know, this doesn't even need to be as complicated as a collaborative practice agreement. It's simpler. Don't overcomplicate it. Get the physicians comfortable with your knowledge of CBD, and they then can direct their patients, your customers, to you. You know, say, you know, Joe at Joe's Pharmacy in town, he's got this. I'm gonna,
Absolutely.
for one more second here,
Yep.
Linda. We have an acquaintance in upstate rural New York who he is selling about $250,000 a year of CBD. So that's way off the charts crazy. He's doing a great job. I asked him, wow, what are you doing different? And this was his number one go-to. He keeps the physicians educated, keeps them aware of what's going on. They know they can trust him to know what's going on with CBD. And when they get a patient to come in and the patient's asking for Xanax because they're anxious, the physician might say, well, you know, maybe we're not going to double your dose, or maybe let's not try that first. You know, let's go talk to Joe about CBD. I just, that's a fascinating approach to make sure your physician has an understanding that you are the CBD expert.
Absolutely.
Well, how do we get there?
Right. So then the next thing that you want to look at, and I'm saying educate your customers as a way of marketing. Yes, we are talking about educating, because remember, they don't know that there are drug interactions. They have no idea that there are side effects. They are seeing the signs everywhere. We have CBD, right? That at the gas station down the street. So they think it's safe. They're seeing the misinformation, the false claims everywhere. You need to tell them why they should only be buying CBD from you. This needs to be an ongoing, multifaceted campaign using all of the usual marketing channels, you know, digital marketing, social media, radio, TV, print. Inform your customers with bag stuffers, posters, flyers in your store, and most importantly, you're going to talk to them. The message needs to be seen and heard often. So what we've done, and you know, I put your community in there because really, you know, having that information out there is going to, you know, between the physicians and your customers will educate the community.
PSAs and
right,
radio.
Exactly. So I put together some marketing suggestions here, some ideas just from talking to some, you know, pharmacies that we know are really successful at doing these. This is just some ideas that we've put together. So I'm suggesting maybe talk to your local paper, your news stations, and your radio stations, and offer to provide maybe a weekly CBD fact, an article or content piece that educates their readers or viewers, and position this almost like a PSA. I know that a lot of times you're used to dealing with your ad reps, and they come in and you think that this might be something that you would have to pay for, but believe me that they are looking for content. And this is something that I guarantee you, if you're putting this message out there, this is something that the community has never heard before about CBD. There's a lot of news stations that are doing pieces on CBD. You know, is it safe? What should we be looking at? This would be great information coming from someone, and would be a great way for you to position yourself as the expert. So, you know, Tim talked about holding event, you know, just about the pharmacists in upstate New York that we have. He does this. He has events in his store. So we're suggesting here, hold an event in your store. Call it a CBD seminar. Offer discounts and a chance to learn about CBD from the community CBD expert. You can do this for your customers. You can do this for the local physicians, and just make it, you know, one and done. And then maybe if you belong to your local chamber, or you're part of a networking group, so you can present about CBD for lunch or breakfast. This is great information that, again, like I said before, this is a message they have not heard before about CBD, right? Because you're taking a different approach. So we actually have on ncpacbdsource.com a great marketing kit that we've put together. It actually includes all of the things that you can see up on the screen here, everything that you would need to market yourself as the CBD expert in your community. There are flyers in there for your physicians. There are flyers in there and bag stuffers for your patients. It's all customizable. Yeah, it includes radio scripts, everything. It's all up there.
You can see here the importance that we're putting on the pharmacist as the CBD expert. You know, if somebody has we sell CBD here sign outside a vape shop or a convenience store, versus you putting the word out there that our pharmacist is a CBD expert, that's a direction that we believe strongly we need to continue to go in.
Absolutely. And if you have any questions, we actually have, I mean, Tim is here and available to take calls, but we also have, specialists that can take your calls and answer any questions that you have about any marketing questions that you might have about the kit.
And I put people in touch with other people all the time.
Absolutely.
And they want to talk to the manufacturers and so on. So yeah, do not hesitate to give me a call.
All right.
Sure.
So we've had hundreds of questions submitted already, and we've grouped some of those questions. Whenever you registered, you submitted questions. So we've grouped some of them actually into common themes. So we're going to get with, we're going to start off with those first and answer some of those. I'm going to flip through Tim's information, but I will have that up on the screen, and everyone's going to get this sent to them. So you'll have all of his information if you need to contact him after. So the first group of questions that we get a lot are specific state questions. So people have submitted questions about Iowa, North Carolina, California, Kansas, Maine, Michigan. You can see them all up there. They come in hard and fast, right? Like
So
all the time.
I learned my lesson last July. I gave a webinar in early August making a statement about a particular state, and about 5 days before I made that statement live in a webinar just like this, that state had sent out a notice to every pharmacy changing it to the exact opposite of what I was reporting live. So again, this evolves quickly. I want you to make sure you check with your own state board.
And just as a quick example of the uniqueness of this, they only sent that out physically through snail mail.
Yeah.
They didn't put it anywhere on the state website. They didn't email it to anyone. There was no press release.
Yeah, I had a pharmacist call me and say, Tim, you sure about that? I have a letter here. So I got the letter and went, and did a formal apology. So let me just address these states, which those of you who are registered for this webinar have specifically asked about these states. And I'm not going to go into great detail, but Iowa, North Carolina, and California, to the best of my knowledge at this moment, the State Board of Pharmacy is still saying do not have CBD on your shelves in a pharmacy. Kansas, I'm going to defer. Kansas is a little bit of a fuzzy area. You can give me a call and we'll talk about that. But Maine is in October, there was a lot of confusion, and basically the State Board of Pharmacy has now taken a position of no action. Maine was tripping over the food and the food additive, but CBD is not illegal in Maine. The State Board of Pharmacy has officially taken a no action. They won't come with any enforcement activities. Michigan, it's funny there. Michigan, it's one of the states where smoking marijuana is okay, but not CBD. That is changing. They're having issues with it cannot be dispensed as a food additive. So CBD in Michigan is all about a supplement or a food additive, and be very careful calling it that. The state of Washington, the same thing. There was just a law change that you cannot sell CBD as a food additive. It was a big deal there to add CBD to your drink at dinner. Minnesota has actually put out very explicit wording saying, yeah, it's okay to have CBD on your shelves in Minnesota, but they need to meet these criteria. And the state board has been very clear in putting out what those criteria are.
We've had a couple submitted just now during the webinar, and that was for Tennessee and for Massachusetts.
Yeah, Massachusetts is a rough one.
Call you, right?
Yeah. Let me talk to you off air on that one. And Tennessee's fine. One of our first pharmacies, actually a small family chain, they have been selling CBD to the best of my knowledge, and certainly, they're a regular customer of ours.
Absolutely.
Tennessee doesn't really have any restrictions on selling CBD. Obviously, they all have a restriction on selling CBD if it has greater than 0.3% THC.
So again, we're going to go back to why you need to make sure you know exactly what's in there, which leads into our next question. brand questions. So we
Well,
get
John just popped up,
Oh,
New
New
Mexico.
Mexico and Pennsylvania.
New Mexico, I believe, is one of the states where the state board has stayed silent. I've not heard any word that New Mexico has any problem with CBD. And Pennsylvania, we're able to sell. We're sitting here in Pennsylvania. We're able to sell it.
Yeah.
You know, people get tripped up again with the notion of medical marijuana and the dispensaries. Different issue.
Yeah.
CBD not being medical marijuana. So
Completely.
we
right.
can sell it in Pennsylvania.
So brand questions, that's another one that we get a ton of questions about that. How do I know a good brand? Should I carry more than one brand? Why are there so many different prices between brands? Do brands really differ? How many brands should I carry? I mean, this leads right into the legality of things. And we've mentioned this a couple times. We've interrupted Tim, that it's important that you know what's in that bottle, right, Tim? So,
well, absolutely. I mean, you know, what's a good brand? You know, I can show you on the website ones that we have done the vetting of the brands, and we're confident that if you choose one of those, that you're going to be dispensing a brand that we believe you can trust, that it's not going to have THC, that the product, what it's saying is in the bottle, by saying that on the label. You know, we have gone and tested these products, and we do, you know, random batch testing that I think when you look at the market as a whole, you look at 5,000 or more manufacturers out there, that's a hard call to make. That's one of the reasons we created this source, is so that a pharmacist who's filling hundreds of prescriptions a day and realizing they need to get into the CBD market, you know, hopefully exactly each and every one of you on this call are considering, well, how do you do that? How do you go vet thousands of manufacturers? Well, we wanted to take that pain away from you and say, you know, we're not saying that these are the only manufactured products that are the best in the world. Here's the top 5 in the world. We're not saying that at all. We're saying we have vetted these. They met a lot of criteria. They're pharmacist owned. They meet all of the criteria of the labeling. And, you know, if a pharmacist wants to get started, we've tried to make that simple and make this a great place to get started.
absolutely.
Because there are differences in the brands.
Like Evan said about even the liposomal, they're claiming that it's what's on the label. And then he had a really good point when we were planning this, which was about the certificate of analysis and the brand saying we are independently tested, but how can you really trust that they're actually independently tested? You don't know, which is why we've done that on our own.
So
yeah, they could just make a fake, you know, certificate of analysis.
COA.
I think you said Photoshop.
Yeah, Photoshop.
Yeah, I
You know, they're all available online. You can just download a picture of it.
So we're doing that background verification for you.
Absolutely. I'm going to put Tim's information up there while we read a few more questions here. So we've had, oh gosh, so many questions. So somebody asked, this is from Tasha, I hope I'm saying that right. Do you have to have a hemp retail license for the pharmacy in order to sell CBD products?
I'm not even really sure what a hemp retail license is, because Pennsylvania, again, it's a very state-specific answer to that question. But in general, no, because CBD is not governed in most states under that. But there might be some where you do need that. I don't want to say absolutely no. It's just, that's not our first worry. We need to make sure that we're purchasing products that are reliable, that we can trust, that what's in the bottle, we know what's in the bottle. That's more important at this point.
Okay, somebody asked, what are the specific uses for salve? And it's salve, right?
Yeah, salve's an interesting term
word,
to use.
right.
Yeah, I'm a refugee of the 60s, so when I hear the word salve, I know that just means a topical in a lot of different ways. And the question is specifically, what do all broad spectrum CBD produce the same physiological? Well, CBD creates the physiological response. So we're looking at the topical as just the delivery method. What you do need to know about the topical is it is not absorbed systemically. So it's only going to work locally. You know, there was concern early on, well, if someone's taking it orally and putting it on topically, are they going to be getting a double dose, if you will? Not really a concern.
So wait, I'm going to flip through here. So we get a lot of questions about products. So it's same thing as brands. They're asking, you know, what are the best products to carry in the pharmacy? And I think I'm going to say to call Tim about that, because I guess it really kind of depends on what your customer base is like. So I think, as far as what types of products and what the mix of products that they should be carrying, I mean, I think that's a call you kind of question.
Yeah, I mean, if you have questions, I will certainly go over that with you. That's something that's going to be very store specific, patient specific, something that you're going to have to be comfortable with. As I had said before, you've got to get some wins. You've got to get some confidence. And that takes me back. So we had a question pop in here. John, I didn't see the whole question, but about going low, starting low.
It goes back to your comment earlier. This particular pharmacist has titrated up, and it's working. She's just confused and wanted your thoughts on it.
Well, it does work, but as I said in my example, if it works slowly, you risk losing the patient, and you could be wasting their time and money. Low and slow, maybe start low and not so slow. That's what I did with my wife. We went from 25 milligrams sublingually to 60. And then we realized, wow, this works. And we titrated back down. Just a different way to think about it, because I know some people have lost patients saying, this crap doesn't work.
Yeah, I think that's where the knowledge is coming from, talking to literally hundreds of pharmacists and saying, we've had a lot of people say to us that they don't think it works, and we're thinking that's.
So that was just a new thought that I wanted to put out there. But look, if it's go low and slow is working for you, go with what works. Absolutely.
This is a great question here. So this is from Douglas. He asked, when is the FDA going to change their negative position on CBD?
My response is they don't have a negative position. They sort of don't have a position.
Cautionary.
Yeah. Their concern is that there's not enough data yet. And their concern is, let's not be talking about therapeutic claims when it comes to CBD until we know. And as I had quoted Dr. Gottlieb in the presentation a little while ago, their concern is patient safety. Do we really have any studies that can say that there aren't long-term negative effects? Do we think there are right now? Doesn't look like it, but that's not something we can say until we get some evidence.
And this is a great question. Tosha, I hope I'm saying that right. So she or he, I'm not sure, is asking, is there a database with drug interactions? So I put a little star next to that.
Yeah. Well, a database. There are several databases
but you don't know
that I use.
Right. Okay.
There is a Department of Health .dc.gov
right.
that I have referred to. There are several others.
And actually on ncpacbdsource.com, we have a drug interactions page. There are hundreds of links on that page to, citing different drug interactions and studies.
Yeah, Evan has put together a massive collection.
Yeah, we can put a link. We can put a link to the one that you use a lot. Make sure that's on there. Yeah.
There's another one I'm going to throw out here, and I really can't speak to where it comes from and who drives this, other than they look like it's something I go to get an idea, and then I further research. But this is cbdoilreview.org. As with anything, we've got to be a little bit careful.
We'll put a link. We'll put a link on our on the NCPA.
So to answer your question, there's not a single database. That's what the FDA hopefully is going to provide sooner rather than later, but there are several databases.
Okay, well, so we only have about a minute left, but so somebody asked this question. His name's Brian. He says, uses, reliability, standardization, cost, dosage per weight, age, gender, species in general. Why is it important today? And it was not in the 60s.
Well, Brian, I'm not sure
about that. That's a question and a half.
Yeah, it is. I like the question, and as a refugee of the 60s myself, we just didn't know about the endocannabinoid system. We didn't really know about CBD until the late 1990s. That's a great question. I think it's important now for all of the topics and reasons that we talked about and some of the things that Evan showed us here. Well, I think it's time.
Yeah, we're
sorry if we're holding you on too long here, folks.
Yeah, Tim's information is up there. Thank you so much for attending the webinar today, and certainly give us a call if you have any further questions.
We will respond to the other questions via email privately.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, folks. Appreciate it.